Today is June 25th, 1998, Thursday. My name is Oakley Webster Melton III, and I have the pleasure of being with Jim Upchurch for a video interview. And Jim, we start off real easy, okay? Just tell us your full name, your date of birth, and where you were born.
My full name is James T. Upchurch Jr., James Taylor Upchurch Jr.
Okay.
I was born May 1st, 1927, and I was born in Montgomery, Alabama at old Hubbard Hospital, which it hadn't been there for a long time, but it used to be about where the hospital over there on Forest Avenue is now.
Okay. All right, James Taylor Upchurch Jr. All right, give me a little history behind the name. Do you?
Well, I was named after my father, and I have a grandson now that's called Taylor Upchurch, who's James Taylor Upchurch IV. Okay. I think the end of the line probably is about run out, though, because he's embarrassed about putting that fourth on there.
He's fourth is enough.
He'll probably be the last one, and that's all right with me.
He would have left the fourth off if he'd had a choice.
The big confusion is I got a son, it's James T. Upchurch III, well, and all of my mail goes to him, and his mail comes to me, and it just gets awful confusing sometimes.
All right, but your daddy was senior, right? All right, how about, do you know anything as far as the names, those names?
Of my grandparents, of his parents? His parents were John Burton Upchurch and Patty Gardner Upchurch.
All right.
They came from West Alabama, came originally from North Carolina, I think, okay, and then from West Alabama.
Okay.
My daddy was actually born in Reform, Alabama, but he actually lived in Montgomery. My dama had gone over there to visit, and she decided that was a good time to have the baby, so she did. And he was very proud of the fact that he's born in Reform, Alabama.
Reform? You have to tell me where Reform is.
Well, it's way in West Alabama, and I can't call the county Pickens County. Yeah, Pickens County. It's way over there. It's close to Greene County and right on the border of Mississippi, I think. I've been to Reform, but I don't have any kin people there anymore.
How many people are we talking about in Reform, you think?
Certainly a couple of hundred, anyway.
Under 500?
Yeah, not very large, I'm sure, in those days.
Under 500. As far as, all right, so he was James Taylor Upchurch Sr.
That was my daddy.
All right. Do you know where he got his name at all, or because his daddy was John? Did you say
his
John?
daddy was John, and we go back a lot of years in some of our genealogy. James appears lots of times. Taylor appears lots of times. Some connection between the President of the United States, Zachary Taylor, okay, but we never been able to really prove that or run it down exactly.
So there was some passed down. If he was here, you could ask him and he could tell you.
Papa, who was John Burton Upchurch, my grandfather, his father was a captain in the Confederacy. He was Captain Burton Upchurch, and I don't remember what his wife's name was, but they came. They were very poor. They had money at one time. They lost it all between the Civil War and the Depression. They lost it all. And
we're talking about your great-grandfather.
My great-grandfather, and really my grandfather came to Montgomery and had to start all over, you know, and he was a wholesale grocery salesman. Okay. With the old Hobby Grocery Company in Montgomery. And he was one of the first, I've been told this, got no reason to disbelieve it, he was one of the first salesmen that ever had an automobile. And when he bought an automobile, he effectively quadrupled his customer base, and he was a very successful wholesale grocery salesman. Lived over on Plum Street in Montgomery. Always loved to garden. And he had a wonderful garden over there. I mean, a big garden and lots of fresh vegetables and fruits and things like that always coming along. And
this is around Capitol Heights now.
Well, it's Highland. It's really right off of Highland Avenue, about a block off Highland Avenue. That's really where my father's family all came from. They all came from that area right there. And Daddy was the first one to move out of that area. He moved into the Cloverdale area. in about 1932, I think.
So we go from Reform with your well, all right.
Well, my father was born there, but he didn't live there very long. I don't think he ever lived there. He just...
All right, but your great-grandfather, the one he was in the war between the states.
Right, he was captain of the Confederacy.
And he lived in Reform?
Somewhere in that area.
Right around that area.
I'm not sure whether any of them lived in a town. There wasn't much town over there. I just think they lived in Pickens County, really. Okay. He would probably say, I live in Pickens County.
Okay, so then your grandfather is born there, and then your dad was born there too, but he moves to Montgomery.
He lived all his life in Montgomery.
All right, about what age are we thinking?
When he was born or when he
comes to Montgomery? When he comes to Montgomery, actually.
I would say he was less than a month old.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean, my dad was just visiting over there. And as soon as she got able to travel, then they brought him back to Montgomery.
Okay, so it's really your grandfather that made the move then.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, really. Yeah.
And your grandfather is the one, I'll get it confused though, but your grandfather is the one on Plum Street.
That is correct.
And then so your daddy grows up there.
That's
on
right.
Plum Street. All right. Let me jump on to your mother's side for just a short little history. What do you know on her side? All right, give me her name again, full name.
Her name was Eleanor Roche, R-O-C-H-E, and her parents were Austin Oliver Roche and Samuela Grace Roche. I got a story to tell about his parents, but he originally came from France, his mother did, and his father was I'm not sure this is 100% right, but the story is correct. His father was a church organist or something in the little town of Texas somewhere. And the mother died. So nobody take care of my granddaddy but his father. And his father disappeared. And they found his body in the bottom of a well. So my grandfather and his brother had tags put on them. They were put on a freight train in Texas, and they were sent to orphanage in Tuskegee, Alabama. That's where he grew up. He always loved to tell about the orphanage, how good they were to him, and all this, that, and the other. But they gave him a real good raise. But he had nothing. He had nothing. And he started with nothing and ended up pretty near with nothing.
Let me get it straight. He and his brother were put in the orphanage.
That's correct.
All right, and this is your
grandfather
on your mother's side.
On my mother's
maternal
side.
Grandfather. All right, keep going. I'm with you.
Now, my grandfather worked for the mills. My grandmother's father was in the lumber business somehow, and my grandfather worked for his father-in-law, and a big log rolled over his leg one time. And for the rest of his life, he limped and moaned. And he was, in fact, in constant pain for all the years I knew him. And he lived to be 92 or something like that. And he couldn't move this much. It was real effort for him. And it did hurt him, in fact, but it never did slow him down.
He could walk.
Yeah, he could walk, but with a limp and with a hurt. And he gave up the lumber business after that, I think.
I can understand.
Then he went to Tallahassee, Alabama, and he was manager of the old. He was office manager, I think, of the old Tallahassee mills. Had a good job. They had a nice home there. My mother loved Tallahassee, and she went to Huntington College. She was sent from Tallahassee over to Huntington College. About that time, this was before the Depression hit. But at some point, the Depression hit. By the time I was born, 1927, which is in reference, that's the year Lindbergh flew the Atlantic. Now that was when I was born.
You were born that year.
And that was a couple of years before the big Depression began. At some point, my grandfather had the idea of running a movie house. And he had one in Tallahassee. My grandmother played the piano for the days of silent movies, and they were doing real well. I've never have understood whether that was in addition to working at the mill or whether that was what he was doing at the time. I'm not sure about that. One night a fire hit them. It burned them plumb out. They didn't have any insurance, and they didn't have anything else. So that was really his one big shot at doing something with his life financially, and he was wiped out and he never really got over it. Then the Depression came along and the mill closed, and there was one bad thing after another.
Don't know what started the fire at all?
I've never heard any of the details of that at all. The only thing I do know is there's several people in the South, and particularly in Alabama, who were doing the same thing at the time, ended up millionaires. And the luck just wasn't running with him right there.
Actually, the origination of the movie theater in a way that was profitable.
He had the right idea, and he started at the right time, but he just had bad luck.
And she played the piano.
She played the piano.
It was the silent movies, I guess.
That's correct. And she played the piano all her life. She was a long-term member of Dexter Avenue Methodist Church. And she played the piano down there till she was in the 80s, I think, or maybe longer than that.
So she knew what she was doing. Could she play by ear?
Oh, I have no idea, but she could really play. I mean, she could make it run. And two of my sisters inherited that ability. I did not.
You did not. Well, why follow in their footsteps? Take your own path.
But both of my sisters, I've got three sisters. All three of my sisters are accomplished pianists. And I don't know why I didn't get that, but I didn't get that at all.
All right, well, I want to stay on your family a little. No, that's okay to divert, because I'm going to divert here just a second. Speaking of old movies, you're 1927. Do you remember the first movie you ever saw as a kid? Do you have a memory?
The first movie I ever saw.
Or the earliest memory of a movie that you have?
The earliest movie, I hadn't even thought about that.
I'm going to hit you with something you hadn't even prepared for.
But I think it was one of the Follies movies. You ever heard of
What does that mean? All right, I've heard
during the 30s, particularly when sound and everything started coming in, they started making Ziegfeld Follies movies. And they would have what they call them, something of 1935 in the one, then they'd have one of 1936. And some way in there, I got taken to one of those movies. And then I can remember seeing them for a number of years.
A bunch of those.
Then I remember the first movie that ever affected me, I saw up at what is now the Capri Theater, was at that time the Clover Theater. But Jean and I then were, well, I think she was around, I'm not sure, but I was young. I never had been affected by a movie at all. I went to one.
Probably a teenager.
Yeah, I did a movie, okay, went to have a song and dance and this, that, and the other. But I went to see, what's the movie? Well, Ronald Reagan was in it. It's his first big movie.
Not the football one, is it?
No, not that one. But I can't remember. What?
Kings Row.
Kings Row was the name of it. And Ronald got his legs run over by a train and cut off. And that affected me. I can remember now. Gee, my knee, what a terrible thing to happen to somebody. It took a long time to dawn on me that was just a movie. You know, his legs wasn't really cut off.
It may have been your first actually seeing a violent situation.
I don't know what it was, but I remember that movie did affect me. I mean, I understood now that, golly, that's great acting or something like that.
I think of, what did your grandfather with the leg, you know?
Yeah, maybe that had something to do with it. I don't know, but I remember that so well when they came in and told him, where are my legs? And it stayed with me a long time.
And the name of it is what again?
Kings Row.
Kings Row. I guess it's still out on video.
Somewhere, I'm sure.
Wanted to find that.
Yeah.
A Ronald Reagan classic.
A Ronald Reagan classic. A real classic.
So the Capri Theater was actually, it was a movie, the same place it is?
Oh yeah, it was called Clover at that time.
All right, right there where it is.
See, it was not far from where I lived on Cloverdale Park at that time, and Gene and I used to go to the movies constantly as teenagers.
How do you remember the price? You remember how?
It wasn't very much, but we always had a deal. We met on the inside. So I figured out a long time ago. Say I'd come out better if we meet on the inside.
You wouldn't have to pay. You mean
that is correct.
There's still some men who still do that these days.
That doesn't work anymore, but it did work for a long period of time.
Somehow you just said, I'll meet you on the inside where the popcorn is.
That's correct.
I bet it was what? You think it was a dime? You think a dime?
It was on Saturday. I know it was, yeah, the movies. I would go down to the old Strand Theater downtown to see a cowboy movie every Saturday. And I think it was a dime. It cost you a nickel to ride down there on the bus or the streetcar, whatever we were riding at that time. And you'd shoot another nickel or so on a Coke. It didn't take a whole lot to get along with, but nobody had anything.
If you had a quarter, you were in good shape.
Man,
for the
you
weekend.
were rich. Yeah, you were rich. Very seldom I ever had a quarter. I don't even believe I saw one until I was 14 or 15 years old.
Nickels and pennies.
Nickels and pennies. That's you get a lot for a penny.
I mean, did they have dollar bills? They had dollar bills?
I guess they did.
I assume they did, but I wouldn't know either.
Yeah, I'm sure they were issued. There wasn't a whole lot of them around, though.
Not for kids under 21. Well, that's interesting. It's the Strand. You said the Strand. Strand Theater.
Strand Theater, which was right down on Court Square. It hadn't been there for years, of course.
Was it weird like the Empire, the Paramount was?
Yeah. See, the Paramount was there, and it was a high-class movie.
Okay.
The Empire was kind of the second-rate movie. By the time you get down to the Strand, all they showed was cowboy shows, as I recall it. And it smelled funny.
You could get a deal at the Strand.
Yeah, you can get a deal at the
like
Strand.
a dollar movie, dollar today, a dollar
I can't tell you how many Saturdays I've gone to. They used to have continued short subjects. Serials, they called them. And it'd take them forever to get, it was worse than soap operas today. They'd get you all the way up to the horse about to jump over and then they'd stop. You had to come back next Saturday to see how that was going to end up. And that was in addition to the movie. The movie was Tom Mix, I can't remember who the cowboy was back in those days. But we ate
Gene Autry, but they were later.
Gene Autry was a little bit later.
They were later.
Autry, yeah, I think they were a little bit later.
Once things got really rolling, they became the famous ones.
See, I had a fellow, I remember he had 2 pearl-handled pistols, but I can't remember the name.
The guy from Alabama.
Johnny McBride. He was one.
That was in the 30s.
He was one of those, too.
In the 30s.
Johnny Hopalong Cassidy. That was when Hopalong Cassidy was a cowboy. He came back years later.
And you can remember seeing all these?
Yeah, I can't remember what the plots were. They didn't have a whole lot of plots.
They were the big actors, though.
Those were good. We loved them.
Well, Gone with the Wind, was it in the 30s or 40s? Did it?
Gone with the Wind, I suspect, was the late 30s or early 40s.
Early 1940s.
Early 1940s, she says, so she's probably right.
Would you have been a young man when you saw that?
Oh, yeah, I understood Gone with the Wind when I went to it. My mother had read Gone to the Wind. My mother was always read to me all my life when I lived at home. And she read Gone to the Wind with me. It was a long, laborious book, but she thought it was a great story.
But you can actually remember her reading that?
Yeah, I can. And the thing I remember the most, though, was the last sentence in that book. But frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn. And my mother had a hard time telling me about that. I can still remember.
You're saying that's the last
I think in the book and certainly in the movie, but I can remember when she came to that. I did not get the unabridged version of that.
She edited that out. Huh?
Yeah, it was years later that I realized, gee, that was in the book.
Was she still alive? Did you ever confront her on that?
I probably did. I probably joshed her about it. But I did go, by the time I went to see Gone with the Wind in the early 40s, because I was 12, 13, 14 years old, something like that. So, and very impressed with it. You had to buy reserved seats at that time. And it was a movie with an intermission. And it was
long,
yeah. Yeah, and it was the biggest thing that happened in Montgomery for years and years.
Was it the Empire or Paramount?
It was at the Paramount.
At the Paramount, that
was. And they filled that big old theater time after time after time. I can't tell you how many times.
Like the Titanic movie now.
Yeah, it was
even more
in fact, I said not long ago after I saw the Titanic, I said that's the best movie I've seen since Gone with the Wind. So,
you hadn't seen a lot of good ones.
Well, I have seen some good ones, but
not
that was
good.
A spectacle. That was a spectacle.
Yeah, and, you're right about that. It's still good even today. All right, well, let me jump back then, but that's good. We want to divert. It doesn't make any difference. If something hits you, you throw it out, and I'll do the same.
I'm bad about that. If it hits me, you don't want to talk about it.
Well, I'll stop you. I'll stop you. All right, but we're on your mother's side. All right.
Yeah.
tell me, all right, you knew both sets of grandparents as a little boy?
Yeah.
All right, about what general age would they have died? Can you run it down just on your grandparents?
Well, on my mother's side, they both lived into their 90s.
Whew.
And they died very close together.
One December, one February.
Of what year, honey? You remember?
65, I believe.
Yeah, somewhere in that area anyway. Yeah, I knew them very well. I was very close to them. My Granny Roach, I'm stopping that to tell you the story right now.
Give me a story. I want you to tell me a story.
The story is, and I have no reason to doubt it, when I was born, shortly after I was born, I got diphtheria. You probably never heard of diphtheria.
I couldn't tell you what it was.
Diphtheria was a bad disease at that time. It slowly choked you off. It slowly killed you by filling your neck with mucus or something, and you
children and adults.
Yeah. But I think mostly children probably
would get it.
The story is, I was dying as an infant, and Dr. Cobbs, who had been B. Woodfin Cobbs, who delivered me and was my doctor till I got married, they had called him, and he was on the way, but he hadn't gotten there quite as soon as they wanted him to.
Now are you 1 year? You're 1 year?
I think I was less than 1 year. Chip, I don't know. My sister might have some idea, but I don't remember any of this story.
Okay.
My Granny Roach took a spoon, turned it around, and jammed it down my throat, and kept my throat open enough to where I could breathe till the doctor got there. And so, and she did. She saved my life. There's no doubt about it. She was always credited with that by the family. And as a result of that, she and I were very close. Mm-hmm. Even though I wasn't aware of what was going on or anything, but my granny and I were very close. And
did you hear the story early?
Okay. As long as I can remember.
You would have been aware of that story then.
Now, the other part of that story is, it took me a long time to get over that diphtheria. And I was a pretty scrawny kid, just getting along, just making it from 1 year to the next, you might say.
But it's like something you grew out of, sort of?
I think so. The next time I was sick, I had rheumatic fever. That was in the 8th grade. They put me in bed. I got out of that. And the next time I was sick was when I had a stroke about 7 years ago. I hadn't been close to doctors or hospitals or anybody in all those years.
So 3 times in what, 72?
72 years, nearly about 71 and a half or something like that.
71 years? That's not bad.
That's not bad, is it?
No, it's not bad at all. You are one that believes sort of in going to the doctor when you get sick. Not really to go.
And I always invariably felt better on the way. And I could usually turn around for some reason.
No reason to let them find something.
I don't think I would die there. So.
Well, all right. So so both of them live into their 90s. That's incredible.
And my granddad Roach used to take me fishing all the time. That was his great passion in life. And he had a model Ford, as I recall it, one of the early Fords, and we would go to what they called the backwater then, which was Lake Jordan, is where we went fishing, and he was a great bank fisherman. He never liked boats because of his leg and everything. I just think he was scared of them. But he'd put poles out, and he'd have 7 or 8 poles stuck in up there, and he got action. He caught fish wherever he was. He just had that ability. And I remember that most of all when he got blind, as he began to get blind in his 80s, I guess, or 70s maybe, he still could take a hook and a worm, and he couldn't see worth a darn, and he could put that thing on there. He could get it in the water.
Bait the hook.
He could bait the hook for pretty near as long as he lived, although he could not see the worm at all. But he'd hold it there, and he'd get that thing, he'd go through that worm.
And was a strict worm fisherman?
Yeah, I don't ever remember him fishing with much else. He may have fished with minnows or something. I don't know. We'd always stop somewhere on the road and get some bait.
Some kind of live bait was his thing.
But it seemed like me it was mostly worms. And he raised worms for a long time. Had a big thing in his backyard. After he got old, though, and I was beyond going fishing with him, I had other things to do. he had 2 or 3 friends, and they were all about the same age. And they, you know, my mother would die, but they'd get in the car, my granny would die, and they'd take off to the lake. And they did that for a long, long time.
At Lake Martin or Lake Jordan?
At Lake Jordan. I don't think he ever went to Lake Martin.
Better fishing, probably.
Probably too far away.
And too far away.
As I recall it, we went in the sway back bridge area most of the time. And
could you find it to this day?
I can find Swayback Bridge. I can't swear that that's where I went fishing, but I think it was. One time I went fishing with my granny, and my granny went too a lot of times. She loved fish too. One time they had taken me fishing, and they had a watermelon, and we were going to eat the watermelon when the time came to eat the watermelon. Well, that watermelon it was dogging me. It was I just couldn't keep my hands off that thing. And I can hear my granny now saying, "Son, now keep your hands off that watermelon. Something's going to happen." I'd go away for a while, and I'd come back to that watermelon. I'd touch it, and I wanted that watermelon so bad. And all of a sudden, the watermelon got in motion. It's Newton's law of motion. And it started down the hill, I think at Swayback Bridge. And I could see it as it hit the rocks, and it would bounce in the air, and it got going faster and faster, and bouncing higher and higher. And for a good long while, nothing happened. But then all of a sudden, the watermelon disintegrated. That's one of the
unexplained phenomena.
I can still remember that, and then I don't know. I was probably 7 years old at the time, 8 maybe. I don't know, but I can remember that day just like it happened yesterday.
It would stick with you, because I was going to ask you one of your earliest memories. That would be an early.
That would be an early memory.
Do you have one earlier? Do you have a memory that comes to mind earlier than that?
Yeah.
Well, tell me one. Whatever comes to your mind, what would be one?
Nobody in my family believes this, but I'm sure that you'll believe me. You know I'm an honest man.
It's on camera now, so we're going to believe it whether it's true or not.
There was a noted photographer in Montgomery then named Stanley Palger. And if you could afford it, then you wanted your picture taken by Stanley Palger. I don't know how my parents afforded it, but here I was, the first grandson in the family, the first son they'd had and so forth, and nothing would do but they had my picture taken sitting on a piano bench kind of a thing. When I was 1 year old. I remember that as well as I'm telling you about that watermelon story.
You were 1 year old.
I remember when he came in with his cameras and his lights and all that, and Miss Stanley Palger, and everybody thinks I'm lying.
I see your wife shaking her head.
And I tried to get her to find that picture so we could put that in this thing. We've got it somewhere. We do have the picture. We just haven't been able to find it. But I remember that, Chip. I go to my grave saying, I remember having that picture taken.
Now, I have heard stories of people that can have flashbacks like that. And that would have been a traumatic enough...
it was something.
With lights.
I don't remember what I did the day before, the day after, the months after, but I remember that. And the next recollection I have, good recollection, was in 1932, when I was about 4 or 5 years old. We moved from where we had lived over on Cloverdale Park to where I lived the rest of my life before I got married. And I rode on the moving van. They didn't have official moving vans then. You just got some fellas in a truck and here you went, you know. And I remember my mama didn't want me to, but my daddy said, it's all right, let the boy ride up there. So I rode with the drivers or something, and that was a big day. And I remember that very well.
And you were what, probably?
I think I was 4 or 5, maybe 5.
That would stand out, too. That would be enough of an out-of-the-ordinary story to remember over the years. You remember that with your maternal grandmother, your maternal grandfather. You remember the fishing. I sit here and I think about it. You've probably got 25 more years left in you. Have you ever taken any of your grandkids back to that fishing spot?
No.
Before the next 25 years, you might need to do that. Take one of them.
I'm sorry to say that I did not inherit my grandparents' love of fishing. I don't have the patience to do it. I've fished a lot over the years, but I want a guy to take me somewhere and let's catch some fish and go home. And as far as pole fishing,
Well, now I have a memory, without getting overly into this, being a little kid and going to y'all's lake place and distinctly remembering y'all sort of as fishing for some reason.
We used to do a lot of fishing, but with rods and reels, and it was out of boats usually.
I mean, didn't you have a little Evinrude motor?
Oh man, I had a powerful Evinrude. 9.2. 9.2, I think it was. Take you all day to go to the end of the slough out there.
How many years ago would that have been to help me figure out?
That's 40. Oh, no, it wouldn't. I mean, it wouldn't.
30 or 35 years.
Yeah, well, we got that place about
56.
In 1956,
and you came along sometime after that, and I don't remember.
You remember the little boat? That
yeah. We probably had a little boat
I can remember that distinctly.
Yeah,
that was before we had a place, and I remember. Y'all evidently did enough fishing where you.
We did a lot of fishing out of that boat. We trolled and we cast but my granddaddy's kind of fishing, which is pole fishing, he could beat us catching fish any day in the week.
And he could stay all day.
And he could absolutely stay from sun up to dark.
And just sitting right there.
Just sitting right there, not moving much. I don't have that patience.
I don't know if that's a gift from that era or if it may just be a individual personality.
Yeah, I don't know either. I just know I hadn't got that patience.
Yeah. Well, not many people do. That would be a gift to his, probably. All right, that's your maternal side. Give me a memory, if you have it, on your paternal grandfather, grandmother. Do you?
Okay.
Right, about how late did they live?
Well, my grandfather, Upchurch, died in 1936, which I was about 8 or 9 years old.
All right.
And my only memory of him is in the bed. He hadn't shaved, so he developed a beard. And for quite some time before he died, I would usually go over there with my daddy every night, it seemed like to me, and they would play dominoes. And that's what my granddaddy looked for, and his daddy come over and playing dominoes with him. And they didn't let me play, but I was aware that was going on. So he died, as far as I was concerned. I just don't really have much memory of him. My grandmother Upchurch lived for quite a while. She died in 1952.
Okay.
And she had come, we have since found out, I didn't particularly know at the time, but she had come from a very aristocratic family in West Alabama. They lost it all during the Civil War. She hated Yankees till the day she died.
Oh, man.
But she was a very stately woman, whereas my other grandmother was very kindly. And my Dama Upchurch, although I loved her, and I know she loved me, you didn't get many hugs. She was standoffish. She was a Southern lady. She was a Southern lady. And I said, I was writing down some stuff. All my life, I never spent the night with those grandparents. I never realized it before. I spent many nights with my Roach grandparents. I loved to spend the night with them. And we'd listen to Amos and Andy and all the old radio shows, Phil McGee and Molly and things like that, when radio was a big deal, you know. And Granddad listened to the radio every night. And I think that's the reason I like to go over there, because that radio would be on. All I had to do was sit there and listen to it. But I never spent the night with my Upchurch grandparents. And one reason being that he died when I was so young.
And they lived actually where?
They lived on Plum Street.
They're the ones on Plum Street.
Right off Highland Avenue.
All right, your Roach lived...
over on East 3rd Street.
Okay.
They lived more or less in...
Whereabouts is it?
Old Park, not too far from Old Park, about that area.
Okay.
And then my other ones lived in more in the Highland Avenue area.
But the one that was a big gardener, which grandfather?
That was my grandfather on Plum Street. I do remember remember his garden, and I can remember him working in his garden. Even though I was very, very young at that time.
So he was able to do that.
Well, up to a certain point. I don't know exactly when he got down. And don't know exactly what he died of. You know, folks used not to talk about much what they died of. And he had some kind of kidney failure, but I never knew any details of it. And he died.
But actually, then 3 out of the 4 lived a long time.
Yeah,
You were
really.
grown and older.
Yeah.
All right, well, you didn't know, neither of the great-grandparents were alive. None of them.
No, I didn't know them.
Okay.
I didn't know them.
They had already died. You often hear of an aristocratic side and then more of the down-home countryside, and we've all probably got that mixed in us.
Probably so.
In different ways.
So.
And yours was very distinguishable. You remember that even as a little kid.
Yeah, you know, my granddaddy, as I said, he was a wholesale grocery salesman, which in a very romantic occupation.
Well, so
and
really
he had been forced into that because everything they had in West Alabama, both my grandmother's on that side and his family, had been lost during the war, during the war, as they used to call it. And they kind of had to start over. I never heard my dad complain about anything. You know, I used to, you know, you just can't imagine how rich we used to be, anything like that. You know.